Rosa couldn't feel her hands. The basket had already fallen. She didn't remember dropping it, and grains scattered across the cobblestones, each kernel bouncing like her pulse. Too fast, too loud. The entire marketplace had gone silent. The 4 dire wolves were staring at her. Not at the prisoner chained to the execution post. Not at the Lycan King standing above them with his broadsword raised toward the sun, his red cape frozen mid-snap. At her. She tried to step back. Her legs wouldn't move. The wolves' heads were lowered, their massive bodies folded into themselves. Their eyes, amber, ancient, waiting, hadn't blinked since they'd turned away from their king. Someone in the crowd made a choked sound. Rosa's vision tunneled. She could smell soot on her skin. Sweat, blood soaked into the platform wood. One of the wolves made a sound low in its throat, not a growl, a question. Its ears flicked forward, waiting for her. She was a maid. She was nameless. She was the girl who kept her eyes down because invisible people didn't get hurt. But the wolves were still waiting. The king's eyes found hers across the crowd, blue, cold, furious, and something behind them shattered. His voice came out raw. "Seize her!" The royal guards moved. The wolves moved faster. The guards were 20 feet away when Rosa's knees gave out. She hit the cobblestones hard, palms scraping stone, and the impact jolted her lungs back to life. Air rushed in, too much, too fast, and she tasted copper and smoke and the sour reek of her own fear. The crowd had peeled back from her like she was diseased, leaving a circle of empty space that felt more like a target than shelter. The wolves hadn't moved. They were still folded low, still watching her with those amber eyes. The largest one, a black-furred monster with scars crossing its muzzle, tilted its massive head and waited. She didn't know what it wanted. The guard's boots hit the stone in rhythm, a drumbeat of inevitability. She could hear the creak of leather armor, the slide of steel leaving scabbards. Somewhere behind her, a woman was crying. Somewhere closer, a man whispered a prayer to the old gods, the ones before the Lycans took the world and made it bleed. She'd spent 21 years learning how to be nothing. Turns out, nothing was safer. But the wolves had looked at her, and now everyone else was looking too, and there was no going back to invisible. The thought made something crack open in her chest. Not fear, exactly. Grief. For the girl who'd scrubbed floors this morning and thought her biggest problem was the head housekeeper's temper. That girl was already dead. "Stand aside." The voice cut through the marketplace like a blade through silk. King Paul Camps descended from the execution platform, each step controlled. He was broader than any man had a right to be, his armor sculpted to enhance the threat of him, overlapping plates of blackened steel that caught the light and swallowed it. The red cape billowed behind him. His face was all sharp angles and cold fury, the kind of handsome that warned you away. The wolves shifted, not toward their king, toward Rosa, positioning themselves between her and the guards. Paul stopped 10 feet away, close enough that she could see the muscle working in his jaw, the way his gloved hand flexed on the hilt of his broadsword. There was old blood in the fuller, dark, dried, permanent. "Look at me," he said. Her eyes were locked on the cobblestones, on the scattered grain, on the ants crawling through the mortar cracks. Harmless things. "I said, look at me." The command hit her like a physical force. Her head snapped up, And then she was staring into his eyes. Blue, ice cold, furious. And something happened. A tether. That was the only word for it. Something invisible and unbreakable pulled taut between them, snapping into place with an almost audible click. She felt it in her sternum, behind her ribs, like a hook had caught in the meat of her and yanked. Her breath stuttered. His eyes widened, just a fraction, and she knew he felt it too. For one suspended moment, neither of them moved. Then his expression shuddered, went flat and merciless. "What are you?" Quieter now, more dangerous. I'm no one. I'm just..." The wolves bowed to you, each word precise. 4 royal dire wolves, bonded to my bloodline since birth, turned away from a direct kill command and bowed to a human servant. He stepped closer. The tether pulled. "What are you?" "I don't know." But the word was already spreading through the crowd, whispered from mouth to mouth, gathering weight with each repetition. Witch, witch. The maid is a witch. Rosa felt the word land on her skin like a brand. Felt it rewrite her in real time, erase 21 years of anonymity and replace it with something monstrous. She'd been invisible her whole life. Being seen was going to kill her. Paul Camps raised his hand, and the marketplace went silent. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner, every trembling onlooker. Witch. The word hung in the air for one crystalline moment. Then the market exploded. Rosa didn't remember deciding to run. Her body made the choice, legs straightening, feet finding purchase, hands shoving through the crowd. Behind her, Paul Camps was shouting orders, his voice cutting through chaos like a whip crack. 10 silver to the man who brings her down, 20 if she's alive. The crowd turned on her. The baker's wife, a woman Rosa had served breakfast to yesterday morning, had smiled at, had been invisible to for 3 years, lunged forward and grabbed for her arm. Rosa twisted away, felt cloth tear, kept moving. A young vendor tried to block her path. She ducked under his arms, nearly went sprawling. Yesterday they looked through me. Today they'll rip me apart for silver. She cut into a narrow alley between 2 shops, her shoulder slamming into wood hard enough to send sparks down her arm. Behind her, boots, shouts, steel on stone. The wolves were howling now, deep resonant calls that sounded less like animals and more like war horns. She didn't know if they were calling for her or to her. The alley spat her out into a residential side street. Laundry lines overhead, children who scattered when they saw her coming. She vaulted a low fence, landed badly, felt something in her ankle twist. A crossbow bolt punched into the wall beside her head. The stone chips stung her cheek. That close. A hand's width to the left, and this story would have ended in a side street with Rosa face down in someone else's laundry runoff. 3 days ago, I was worried about the housekeeper docking my pay for a cracked plate. Now I'm dodging crossbow bolts and wondering if the next one finds my spine. That's how fast nothing becomes everything. That's how fast invisible becomes target. Rosa dove behind a water barrel. The guards had archers. Of course they had archers. Paul Camps didn't do anything halfway. She had no allies, no safe houses, no plan beyond a way. Her entire life had been about staying small, staying unnoticed, and now she was the most hunted person in the kingdom. Spread out. A male voice, calm, military. Kill on sight if necessary. Kill on sight. She pushed off the barrel, staying low, and ran. Made it 3 steps before a hand shot out from a doorway and dragged her inside. Rosa's scream died in her throat as a palm clamped over her mouth. She was yanked into darkness, into a space that smelled like old leather and weapon oil, and a blade pressed against her throat. "Don't scream," the voice said, male, low, controlled. "Don't move." Outside, boots passed. Voices called coordinates. The sounds faded. Her eyes adjusted. She could make out her captor, tall, lean, wrapped in a dark cloak. His hair was silver, not gray like an old man's. Silver like moonlight, like steel. "I'm going to take my hand away," he said quietly. "If you scream, you'll be dead before you hit the ground. Nod if you understand." She nodded. The blade allowed it. His palm lifted. "Who are you?" she whispered. "Wrong question." The silver-haired man tilted his head. "Better question. Why did I just save you?" Because I don't serve the crown." The blade lowered, but didn't sheathe. "I serve the spirit." The words hit her like a second tether. His eyes, gray as winter sky, locked onto hers. "And the spirit has been waiting for you for a very long time." The room was barely large enough to be called a room. Rosa sat on a wooden crate, watching the stranger move through the cramped space. He'd sheathed his knife, but his hand stayed close to the hilt, still deciding whether she was worth the risk. "Drink." He held out a water skin. She stared at it. "If I wanted you dead," he said, "I would have left you in the street." She drank. "Thank you," she said, because even now the instinct to be polite was hardwired into her. "You don't have to do that." "Do what?" "Thank me for basic decency." He moved to the window, peering through a crack in the shutters. "You've been erased so thoroughly, you think kindness is a gift instead of a baseline." The words landed like a slap. "You don't know me." "I know what you are." "And I know what that means in a kingdom built on domination. I'm a maid. You were a maid. Now you're a target. The difference matters." His name was Silas. He'd been watching her for 3 weeks, tracking the way animals reacted to her, the way crowds parted without realizing it. Small things. "The wolves didn't bow to you because of what you can do," Silas said carefully. "They bowed because of what you are." "I'm nothing." "That's what you've been taught to believe." Something flickered across his face. Anger or pity. "Have you ever wondered why the Lycan Kings rule through fear instead of loyalty?" "Because they're stronger." "No, because they're usurpers." He leaned forward. "Before the kings, before the hierarchy, there were humans who carried something the wolves needed. A resonance. The old texts call them sovereigns, humans whose presence aligned the wolf spirits, gave them direction. The relationship was symbiotic, sacred. That's folklore. Folklore is history that makes the victors uncomfortable." His eyes never left hers. "The kings wiped out the sovereign bloodlines 3 centuries ago. Hunted them, killed them, burned the records, built a new order where strength was the only currency. Until now," Rosa whispered. "Until now." The tether in her chest pulsed. Through it, she could feel Paul Camps, distant but present, his fury burning like a banked fire. She pressed her hand against her sternum. "You feel him," Silas said, not a question. "The bond. It works both ways." "I don't want to feel him." "I know, but the tether doesn't care what you want. It's biological." He paused. "The sovereigns were designed to connect with all wolves. Kings, ferals, everything in between. The bond between you and Paul Camps is just the loudest thread in a web you haven't activated yet." Rosa's throat tightened. "The king will kill me." "Yes, If he catches you, he'll execute you publicly. Make an example. Then I'm dead. Not if you run. The forbidden forest is 2 miles north. The wolves there are wild, old, dangerous, but they'll recognize you. They'll protect you. He moved to a trap door in the floor. There's a tunnel. Leads to a grain warehouse on the northern edge. Rosa didn't move. If she went into that tunnel, she was accepting this. Accepting that her old life was over. If she stayed, she'd die. The choice wasn't really a choice at all. Why are you helping me? She asked. Because 300 years ago, my family was slaughtered for serving the last sovereign. I'm the only one left. He stopped. You're not just a girl, Rosa. You're a second chance for an entire species to remember what they lost. No pressure. She limped to the trap door. When you reach the forest, Silas said, look for a wolf with a scar across its left eye. White fur. It's been waiting longer than I have. You're not coming? Someone needs to misdirect the guards. His smile was thin. This is your journey. I'm just the messenger. Rosa climbed down into the dark. The tunnel swallowed her whole, and behind her, Silas closed the trap door with a soft, final thump. She was alone. She'd always been alone. The difference was that now she knew it. The forest was old in a way that made Rosa's bones ache. She'd waited in the grain warehouse past midnight, listening to the town tear itself apart, searching for her. Now the trees swallowed her whole, trunks wide as houses, branches that blocked out the moon, air that tasted like rot, and growth happening simultaneously. Her ankle had swollen past useful. She'd wrapped it with strips torn from her underskirt, pulled her boot tight. It would have to be enough. People went in and didn't come out. That's what the servants whispered about this place. She should have been terrified, was terrified. But underneath the fear was something almost like relief. For the first time since the market square, no one was watching. No guards, no king, no crowd. Just trees and darkness and the sound of her own breathing. And through the tether, faint now, muffled by distance, she could feel Paul Camps pacing in his throne room. Could feel his restlessness like an itch behind her ribs. Every few minutes, his attention would sharpen, reaching along the bond like fingers feeling for a pulse, and she'd feel a surge of his presence flood through her. Warm, overwhelming, suffocating in its intensity. She tried to shut it out. Couldn't. The tether didn't have an off switch. But here's the thing she wouldn't admit. Not yet. Not even to herself. Part of her didn't want to shut it out. For 21 years, no one in the world had been aware of Rosa's existence in any meaningful way. She'd moved through life like a draft under a door. Felt occasionally, but never looked for. Never noticed when she wasn't there. And now someone was thinking about her. Furiously, obsessively, but thinking about her. And the tether carried the shape of that attention like warmth through a wall. It didn't feel like hatred from this distance. It felt like gravity, like she'd been floating untethered her whole life, and someone had finally given her weight. It was the most seen she'd ever felt, and it disgusted her that it came from the man trying to kill her. That her starved heart couldn't tell the difference between obsession and care. That 21 years of emotional emptiness had made her body so desperate for connection that even a murderer's attention felt like sunlight. You don't crave poison because it tastes good. You crave it because you've been thirsty so long that anything wet looks like water. She pressed her hand against her sternum, trying to push the feeling down. The tether pulsed back, And for one terrible moment, she felt Paul's hand mirror her gesture, felt him pressing against his own chest, in his own throne room, trying to contain the same impossible connection from the other end. They were both drowning in each other, and neither of them knew how to swim. She walked deeper, following instinct she didn't trust. Time stopped meaning anything. Her ankle throbbed with each step. Her hands were numb from gripping tree trunks for balance. The forest pressed in from all sides, dense and watchful, and utterly indifferent to whether she lived or died. No one had ever been indifferent to her survival before. They'd needed her alive to scrub their floors, or they'd needed her dead to preserve their power. But the forest didn't need her at all. It was the most honest relationship she'd ever had. Then she smelled blood. Fresh, animal, big, close. She should have run. Instead, she followed the smell to a small clearing where moonlight broke through the canopy. And there, collapsed against an ancient oak, was a wolf. Not a dire wolf, a forest wolf. Massive but wild in a way the king's wolves had forgotten. Its fur was dark gray, nearly black. A crossbow bolt jutted from its shoulder. Dying, maybe. The wolf's eye cracked open, fixed on her. She waited for it to snarl. Instead, it went still, that frozen attention from the market square, seeing something in her that didn't match what she looked like. "I can't help you," she whispered. "I don't know how." But her feet moved before her brain caught up. She crossed the clearing, knelt beside it. Up close, the wound was ugly, ragged. The bolt needed to come out. She didn't have bandages, didn't have anything except her shaking hands. The wounded recognized the wounded. She gripped the bolt. The wolf's body tensed. Teeth showed for a moment, massive, designed to crack bone. Then the tension released. Its head dropped back. Trust. It's trusting me? She pulled. The bolt came free with a wet sound. Blood welled up. She pressed torn cloth against the wound, the fabric soaking through immediately. The wolf whined, a sound too vulnerable for something that size. "I know," Rosa said. "I know it hurts." The bleeding slowed. The wolf's eye closed, its body relaxing into something that looked almost like sleep. Rosa settled against the tree beside it, close enough to feel its warmth. She closed her eyes. When she opened them, the wolf was gone. In its place, curled in the blood-soaked leaves, was a man. Silver hair, gray eyes, the same wound, the same ragged hole where the bolt had pierced fur and found flesh. Silas. Rosa couldn't breathe. He stirred. His hand moved to his shoulder, found the wound, and his eyes opened. Recognition. Then shame. "You were the wolf," Rosa said. Not a question. "Yes." "You're a Lycan." "Yes." He didn't elaborate. Just sat there bleeding and naked and looking at her like she'd discovered something he'd wanted to keep buried. The anger surprised her. She'd been too afraid, too overwhelmed to be angry before. But it arrived now. Hot, sharp, alive, and it was the first clean emotion she'd felt since the market square. "You let me think you were human. You let me trust." "Would you have trusted me if I'd told you?" Silas's voice was sharp. "A Lycan appears in your escape route. It tells you you're destined to lead wolf spirits, and by the way, I can turn into one of the creatures hunting you. I didn't get the chance to decide." The words hung between them. "Everyone keeps making my choices for me. You, the king, destiny itself. The maid isn't allowed to have opinions. She just gets dragged." Silas was quiet. Then, "You're right. I should have told you. The honesty caught her off guard. She'd expected defensiveness. I was shot by the King's patrol 2 days ago, he continued. Too weak to shift back. When I smelled you entering the forest, I thought, if I could just get close, maybe you'd recognize me. Maybe I could protect you even in this form. Instead, I pulled a crossbow bolt out of your chest without your consent. Instead, you saved my life, without knowing what I was, without knowing if I'd kill you. She looked at her hands, crusted with his blood. Lycan blood. She'd been taught her whole life that Lycans were superior. Seeing one bleed had felt wrong, like watching a law of nature break. But he'd bled the same as anyone else. Red, warm, mortal. The King can bleed too, she said suddenly. Yes. I felt it, in the market square. There was that tether. She struggled. He was afraid of me. Paul Camps, who kills people for sport, was afraid. And even now, even knowing what the tether meant, there was something in her that kept circling back to the texture of it. The way Paul's attention had felt through the bond. Not kind, not gentle, but present. Aware of her in a way no human had ever been. She hated that she noticed. You're a threat to everything he's built, Silas said. His authority rests on the idea that Lycans are inherently dominant, that the hierarchy is natural. But you exist, and your existence proves it's a lie. The words should have felt empowering. Instead, so I'm a tool, something to be used for someone's greater purpose. Your family waited 300 years for a sovereign. You watched me for 3 weeks. You led me to the forest with carefully omitted truths. Rosa's voice was steady now, cold. How is that different from what the King does? You just use prettier words. The silence that followed was brutal. Maybe it isn't different, Silas said finally. Maybe I've spent so long preparing for this that I forgot you're a person, not a prophecy. He met her eyes. But I'm telling you the truth now, all of it, and I'm asking what you want to do next. Not telling. Asking. Everyone wants to write my story, but this was the first time someone had offered her the pen. The guards are expanding the search, Silas said. They'll find us by dawn. Deeper in the forest, there's a place, ruins, ancient. The mountain, it's where the old sovereigns went to understand what they were. And you? He looked at his shoulder, still bleeding. I'll slow you down. I didn't ask about logistics. I asked about you. Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, that she cared. I'll follow when I can, he said quietly. If I can. Rosa stood, her ankle screamed. If you die out here after everything, after making me pull that bolt and trust you and question everything, I will find a way to be furious about it in whatever comes after. Silas almost smiled. Noted. She walked into the dark, alone, again. But this time, the anger kept her warm. The mountain had been waiting for her. Rosa knew it the moment she saw the ruins, stone pillars jutting from the mountainside like broken teeth, supporting nothing, framing emptiness. What remained was architecture and silence, and the weight of something that had lasted long enough to forget its own purpose. She'd climbed for hours. Her ankle had gone from pain to numbness, which was worse, but at least meant she could keep moving. The forest changed as she ascended, trees more twisted, bark black, ground soft and treacherous. The tether thrummed the entire way. Paul Camps hadn't slept in 3 days. She knew this because she could feel his exhaustion mixing with her own, his thoughts bleeding through the bond in fragments. His counsel was begging him to delegate. He'd refused. He was coming himself. Here's what nobody tells you about being the object of someone's obsession. It creates intimacy, whether you want it or not. Rosa knew things about Paul Camps that his closest advisors didn't. She knew the rhythm of his breathing when he was trying to control his temper. She knew that underneath the fury was a fear so old it had calcified. Fear that his authority was a performance, that the wolves obeyed because they had no alternative, not because they chose him. She knew his hand shook when he was alone. She knew his hand shook, and she hated that the knowledge made him human. It would be so much easier to run from a monster. But the tether kept showing her a man, broken in different ways than she was. Cruel because cruelty was the only language his world had taught him. Terrified of the same void she'd lived in her entire life. The void of not mattering. She pushed the thought away. He'd ordered her killed. He was riding toward this mountain with 4 dire wolves and a broadsword, and the absolute certainty that tonight would end with her blood on his blade. Understanding someone doesn't mean forgiving them. She needed to remember that. The ruins opened before her. In the center of a circle of pillars, a seat. Calling it a throne felt presumptuous, but that's what it was. Carved from dark stone, facing north. Rosa collapsed onto it. The moment she sat, something shifted. The threads in her chest flared. Not just the tether to Paul, but others she hadn't felt before. Hundreds, thousands. A web of silver light spreading from her chest like a map of every wolf within 100 miles. Dormant connections, waiting. She could feel each one, a point of potential consciousness she could activate with a thought, and they could feel her. In the forest below, the royal dire wolves stopped, turned toward the mountain. Paul Camps felt what they felt, and his obsession sharpened into something crystalline. He knew exactly where she was now. Then, movement in the trees below the ruins. Not Paul, not guards, wolves. 7 of them, lean and scarred, moving with coordinated precision. Wild forest pack. Their eyes caught the red moonlight and threw it back like mirrors. No threads connecting them to her. Just predators who'd found prey. The alpha, gray fur, notched ear, stepped forward. Lips peeled back from yellow teeth. Rosa gripped a rock. 1 rock against 7 wolves. Here's what nobody tells you about being hunted. It clarifies things. All the philosophical questions about power and destiny evaporate when teeth are inches from your throat. You stop thinking about what kind of person you want to be. You just want to be. And that's the trap. Because the things we do to survive become us. The alpha lunged. Rosa's hand shot out, the empty one. Stop! The word came from somewhere deeper than her throat, from the place where the threads originated, where her heartbeat synchronized with Paul's. The alpha froze mid-leap, crashed to the ground in a graceless heap. The rest of the pack went rigid, bodies locked, teeth bared, utterly motionless. 7 new threads ignited, 7 connections snapping into place, binding the pack to her will. She'd forced them to stop, reached into their autonomy and crushed it like paper. The alpha whined, confusion, fear. Through the thread, Rosa could feel its panic, its rage, its desperate need to reclaim its own body. She could feel its memories too. Brief flashes of running through moonlit forest, of hunting with its pack, of the wild joy of choosing where to go and when. All of that was gone now, replaced by a leash made of biology and desperation. She turned it into a puppet. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I'm so sorry." But sorry didn't undo it. The threads pulsed with her heartbeat, permanent, The wolves stayed bound. She tried to release them, screamed at the connections to break, tried to push the power out the way it had come in. Nothing worked. The threads had been designed for permanence, for bonds that lasted lifetimes. The old sovereigns hadn't needed a release mechanism because they'd never used the power to enslave. They'd asked. And the wolves had chosen. Rosa hadn't asked. She'd commanded. And the difference was everything. Power doesn't corrupt all at once. It happens in moments like this, when you're terrified and you reach for control because it's the only thing that might keep you alive. And then you can't put it back. The alpha's eyes locked on hers. Not recognition, not respect, pure hatred. Rosa had saved her life and destroyed theirs. Paul Camps ruled through fear and force, and she'd just discovered she could do the same thing. The only difference was that she hated herself for it. But hatred doesn't make you less of a tyrant. Only your next choice does. Through the tether, she felt the king begin to climb. Paul Camps hadn't slept in 3 days, and he'd stopped pretending it mattered. His council had begged. Chancellor Vren had shouted about succession. Lord Marshal Hecton had reminded him that kings who abandoned their thrones for personal vendettas didn't stay kings long. Paul had heard all of it, processed none of it. Because Rosa's heartbeat was in his chest, and it was the only sound that made sense anymore. Here's what obsession looks like from the inside. It feels like clarity. Like everyone else is distracted by trivialities while you've finally seen the only thing that matters. He rode at the front of his hunting party, 4 dire wolves flanking his horse, their massive bodies moving through the forest like shadows with teeth. The wolves were agitated. They could feel her too, feel the mountain's ancient power amplifying what she was, and their loyalty was splitting. He'd commanded them his entire life. They'd never hesitated before. Now they kept turning their heads upward, toward her. Paul had grown up believing that strength was a straight line. You had it, or you didn't. You wielded it, or you were wielded by it. His father had taught him that. His kingdom had confirmed it. Every rebellion crushed, every traitor executed, every law enforced had proven the same simple equation. Power flows downhill, and kings stand at the top. But Rosa existed, and the equation didn't account for her. She wasn't strong, couldn't fight, couldn't command armies, could barely walk on that ruined ankle he could feel throbbing through their bond. And yet his wolves, the wolves his bloodline had bred and bonded for centuries, had knelt. Not because she'd forced them, because something in their biology recognized her as the thing they'd been missing, which meant they'd been missing something, which meant he'd never been enough. That's the real wound, isn't it? Not that she threatens my power, that she proves it was always incomplete. Sire, Hecton, riding behind him. The wolves are... I know what the wolves are doing. If they turn, they won't. But the certainty felt thin. Everything felt thin now. His authority, his confidence, the entire architecture of power he'd spent 8 years perfecting. One servant girl in a market square had cracked the foundation, and now he could feel the whole structure shaking. Through the tether, he felt Rosa's guilt about the wolves she'd bound, could feel her self-hatred mixing with his obsession, creating something toxic and magnetic that made him spur his horse faster. She didn't want the power. That's what made it worse. Paul had spent his life taking power, wielding it, crushing anyone who questioned it. And Rosa had stumbled into something that made his authority irrelevant. and all she wanted was to give it back. You can't give back what you are. I learned that young. He'd been 12 when his father had first placed the broadsword in his hands. Kings don't choose to be kings, his father had said. They're born to it. Fighting it just means you suffer before you accept. He'd hated his father for that. He'd become his father anyway. And now there was a girl on a mountain who'd been born to something too. Yeah, and he could feel her fighting it the same way he'd fought his own inheritance. Desperately, uselessly, with the growing understanding that resistance was just a slower kind of surrender. They were the same. The tether kept showing him that truth, and he kept trying to look away. "Leave the guards at the tree line," Paul said. "Sire?" "The mountain. I go alone." Hecton's face went rigid. That is, with respect, insane. "She enslaved 7 wolves with a word, Hecton. What do you think your guards will do against that?" Paul swung down from his horse. The dire wolves gathered close, pressing against his legs. Through them, through the tether, he could feel Rosa sitting on that ancient throne, could feel her bracing for him. This was always going to be between her and me. He drew his broadsword. The metal sang, and Paul Camps, the Lycan King, the terror of 5 provinces, the man who'd never once questioned whether his power was earned, began to climb the mountain toward the woman who'd made his wolves kneel. Rosa heard him before she saw him. Boots on stone, the scrape of armor against rock, the heavy breathing of a man who'd ridden through the night without stopping. And through the tether, a wall of emotion so intense it made her vision swim. Fury, fear, hunger, desperation. Then he was there. Paul Camps stepped through the pillars into the ruins, and the red moon turned his armor to blood. He was bigger than she remembered, or maybe the mountain made everything feel smaller. His broadsword was drawn, catching the moonlight, and his eyes, those blue, frozen eyes, found hers immediately. The tether between them went taut as a bowstring. The 4 dire wolves fanned out behind him. They were shaking. Rosa could feel them through the web of dormant threads, could feel their souls pulled in 2 directions, loyalty to their king warring with something older, something biological that recognized her as the thing they'd been searching for their entire existence. So, Paul's voice was raw. 3 days without sleep had stripped away the royal performance. What remained was just a man, exhausted, obsessed, standing in ruins that were older than his bloodline. "This is where you've been hiding." "I stopped hiding," Rosa said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "That's not the same thing." He circled to her left. She didn't move from the throne. The 7 bound wolves tensed at the edge of the ruins, unable to leave, watching with conflicted eyes. "You enslaved a pack," Paul said. His gaze moved to the bound wolves. "I can feel them, through the bond, through you. They hate what you did." "I know. Doesn't bother you?" "It's the only thing that bothers me." She met his eyes. "But you wouldn't understand that. You've been enslaving things your entire life and calling it leadership." The blow landed. She saw it in the way his jaw tightened, the way his grip shifted on the broadsword. Through the tether, she felt the words cut deeper than she'd intended, felt them find the fear he'd buried under decades of authority, that he was just a better-dressed version of what she'd accidentally become. "You don't know what I am," Paul said quietly. "I know exactly what you are. The tether shows me." Rosa stood from the throne. Her ankle buckled, and she caught herself on the stone arm. Not the powerful stance she'd wanted, but power hadn't been the point. I know you were 12 when your father put that sword in your hands. I know you hated him for it. I know you became him anyway. I know your wolves obey because there's no one else to obey, not because they choose you. Silence. The mountain held its breath. And I know your hands shake when you're alone, she added softly. Paul's composure cracked. Not dramatically, not a shout or a lunge, just a fracture. A hairline split in the mask he'd worn so long it had fused to his face. Through the tether, Rosa felt the break as if it were her own. You don't get to know those things, he said. His voice was barely a whisper. You don't get to reach inside me and... You think I chose this? You think I wanted to feel you pacing at 3 a.m., terrified that without the crown, you're nothing? Rosa's voice broke. We're the same, Paul. Both of us. Born into something we didn't ask for. Destroying things to survive. Hating what we've become. The only difference is, you had a throne when it happened, and I had a mop. The words hung in the air between them. The dire wolves had gone still, completely still, all 4 of them, watching this exchange with an intelligence that had nothing to do with training. Paul took a step closer, then another. The broadsword was still drawn, but it wasn't raised. It hung at his side like he'd forgotten it was there. 3 feet away. 2. Close enough that she could see the dark circles under his eyes. The scar on his jaw she'd never noticed before. The way the armor sat heavy on his shoulders, like he was carrying something heavier than steel. The tether between them was screaming. Every emotion either of them had felt in 3 days. Her terror, his obsession, her guilt, his fear, her anger, his hunger. All of it compressed into the space between their bodies, vibrating at a frequency that made her teeth ache. I could kill you, he said. Right now. End this. The bond would break. My authority would be restored. Everything goes back to what it was. Yes. I should kill you. Probably. His hand moved, not the sword hand, the other one. He reached toward her face, and she flinched, and he stopped. His fingers hung in the air between them, trembling. I don't want to, he said, and through the tether, she felt the truth of it like a blade between her ribs, felt the way those 4 words cost him more than any battle, any execution, any act of violence he'd ever committed, because wanting to spare her meant his authority wasn't absolute, meant he was choosing a servant girl over his empire, meant his father had been wrong about what kings were for. Understanding someone doesn't mean forgiving them, but it makes it harder to reduce them to the worst thing they've done. Then don't, Rosa said. It's not that simple. Nothing about this is simple. She reached up, slowly, deliberately, and closed her hand around his suspended fingers. The contact sent a shock wave through the tether. She felt his pulse spike, felt his breath catch, felt everything he'd buried under 8 years of absolute control rush to the surface like water from a broken dam. Fear, loneliness, the desperate desire to be known by someone who wouldn't run from what they found. You're afraid of what I am, Rosa said quietly, holding his hand. But you're more afraid of what it means about you, that your wolves would bow to me, that your power was never really yours. It was all I had. I know. She squeezed his fingers. I had nothing, and you had everything, and we both ended up here, on a mountain, in ruins, trying to figure out whether we're enemies or... She stopped, because the alternative to enemies was something neither of them was ready to name. Paul's hand tightened around hers. My council will demand your execution. I know. I can't protect you and keep my throne. I'm not asking you to protect me. Rosa released his hand, stepped back, the tether stretched between them, humming with everything they'd felt and couldn't unsay. I'm asking you to choose who you want to be, your father's son or something else. And if I can't, then you can't, and I'll still be on this mountain, and the wolves will still know what I am, and your authority will keep cracking no matter how many people you execute. She sat back on the throne. The lie doesn't get stronger the harder you enforce it, Paul. It just gets more expensive. He flinched, not at the words, at the sound of his name in her mouth. She'd never said it before, had only ever thought of him as the king, the threat, the other end of the tether. But the name changed something, made him specific, made him a person with a history she could feel through the bond. The boy who'd been handed a sword at 12, the teenager who'd watched his father execute dissidents from the throne room window, the young king who'd inherited an empire built on violence and had never been offered an alternative. Naming something is its own kind of power. It's also its own kind of mercy. My father executed the last person who spoke to him the way you're speaking to me, Paul said. And yet you're still standing there. I'm not my father. No, you're not. Rosa looked at him, really looked, past the armor and the broad sword and the title. Your father wouldn't have come alone. Your father wouldn't have felt the tether and been afraid of what it meant. Your father would have sent 100 men and burned this mountain to ash. Maybe he should have. Maybe. But you didn't. You came yourself. You climbed a mountain in full armor after 3 days without sleep because... She stopped. Because the tether was showing her the answer, and it was too large, and too complicated, and too terrifyingly human to fit into words. Because you needed to see me. Not the sovereign, not the threat. It's me. The silence that followed was the most honest thing either of them had ever shared. The dire wolves moved. Not on command, not on instinct. They moved because the moment demanded it, all 4 of them padding forward, past their king, toward Rosa. They didn't bow this time. They sat, equidistant between Paul and Rosa, facing outward, forming a protective circle that included both of them, not choosing sides, choosing something else entirely. Paul stared at his wolves, at Rosa, at the ancient ruins and the red moon and the web of silver threads he could almost see pulsing in the air between them. Then he did something Rosa hadn't expected. He sheathed his sword. The metal slid home with a sound like an exhaled breath. His hands, those shaking hands he'd hidden from everyone, hung empty at his sides. I don't know how to be something else, he said. I don't know what comes after the lie. Neither do I. Rosa's voice was quiet. But I know what doesn't work. Domination doesn't work. Invisibility doesn't work. Running doesn't work. Maybe the only thing left is the thing neither of us has tried. Which is? Choosing. Not being chosen. Not being forced. Actually choosing, with full knowledge of what it costs and who it hurts and how badly it might fail. She looked at the 7 wolves she'd enslaved, at the dormant threads pulsing in her chest, at the man who'd ridden through the night to kill her and couldn't do it. I don't know what this power is supposed to be, but I know what it shouldn't be, and I know I can't figure it out alone. The red moon hung between them like a question mark,